It happened so quickly that many people didn't realize they were in danger until it was almost too late. At around 6 p.m., as the final evening of the Bite of Seattle festival unfolded, a series of sharp cracks suddenly echoed across the Seattle center. For a brief moment, confusion spread through the crowd instead of panic. Some people assumed the sounds were fireworks. Others thought equipment had fallen over or that a vehicle had backfired somewhere. Outside the festival grounds, the music was still playing, conversations continued, and for a few seconds, many simply looked around, trying to understand what they had heard. Then came another burst, and another. This time, the sounds were impossible to mistake. People began screaming. In an instant, thousands of festival-goers realized they were hearing gunfire. The peaceful atmosphere that had defined the weekend disappeared almost immediately. Parents grabbed their children without stopping to collect bags or belongings. Friends who had been laughing together only moments earlier became separated as people sprinted in different directions, desperate to escape the danger. Witnesses later described scenes of complete confusion. Some dropped to the ground, hoping to avoid the bullets. Others ran behind food trucks, vendor tents, and concrete walls, searching for anything that could provide cover. Restaurant workers hurried customers into their booths, while nearby buildings became temporary shelters for people fleeing the violence. That spread far beyond those who could actually see what was happening. Investigators would later say the shooting was not a random attack on the crowd. According to police, it began as a confrontation involving multiple individuals who exchanged gunfire in the middle of the packed festival, but in a place filled with families and tourists. Innocent bystanders had little chance to react before bullets began flying. Within seconds, what had started as a dispute between a small group of people had engulfed an entire festival, as terrified visitors scattered across the grounds. Emergency calls flooded dispatch centers. Officers already assigned to the event immediately rushed toward the sound of the gunfire, while others raced to the scene from nearby locations. For those caught in the middle, time seemed to slow down.
The Seattle Police Department detained a 15-year-old juvenile in connection with the shooting.
As the gunfire finally stopped, a different sound took over the Seattle center. Sirens, cries for help. Within moments, what had been a lively festival filled with music and conversation had become a scene of confusion and heartbreak. Festival-goers who had managed to find cover cautiously emerged, only to be met with a sight few would ever forget. Several people lay wounded across the festival grounds. Others knelt beside complete strangers, doing everything they could to stop the bleeding while waiting for paramedics to arrive. Some used towels, t-shirts, and whatever clothing they could find as makeshift bandages. In those terrifying minutes, ordinary people became first responders, offering comfort to victims they had never met. As emergency crews worked through the chaos, the true cost of the shooting began to emerge. 7 people had been struck by gunfire. 3 of them would not survive. Among those killed was Carlos Israel Sanchez Villalba, a 44-year-old husband and father of 3. He had come to the festival simply to enjoy the afternoon, never imagining it would be his last. His family would later remember him as a devoted father whose life was cut short by violence he had nothing to do with. Another victim was Ashley Whitehead, 56, who had recently moved to Washington from Alabama. She had attended the festival with her adult daughter, expecting to spend a peaceful summer evening together. Authorities also identified Junior C. Nico Samo, 19, among those who died. Investigators later said evidence indicated he had been involved in the exchange of gunfire that sparked the violence. As the investigation continued, detectives worked to determine the exact sequence of events and the role each individual played. The victims who survived faced their own painful journeys. Among the injured was a 2-year-old child struck during the exchange of gunfire. The toddler, who had been enjoying the festival with his mother just moments earlier, became one of the youngest victims of the shooting. Several other adults were also injured and rushed to Harborview Medical Center for treatment. The fact that a child had been caught in the crossfire shocked the community. It served as a heartbreaking reminder that when gun violence erupts in crowded public spaces, the people who suffer most are often those who had nothing to do with the conflict. As ambulances transported the wounded to hospitals across the city, investigators began securing the area with crime scene tape. Detectives marked shell casings scattered across walkways that had been packed with families. Only minutes before, in its place, stood a sprawling crime scene beneath one of the city's most recognizable landmarks. But while paramedics fought to save lives, another battle was unfolding nearby. Police officers were already chasing those believed to be responsible, determined to prevent the violence from claiming even more victims. As frightened families rushed away from the sound of gunfire, Seattle police officers moved in the opposite direction. Officers assigned to the Bite of Seattle Festival had only seconds to react. Without knowing exactly how many shooters were involved or where the gunfire was coming from, they ran toward the danger, knowing that every second mattered. Their first priority was clear: stop the shooting and protect as many people as possible. As officers pushed through the panicked crowd, they found a scene of chaos. People were pointing in different directions. Some shouted that there were multiple shooters. Others simply begged officers to help those lying on the ground. The uncertainty made the situation even more dangerous. Within minutes, additional patrol officers, firefighters, and emergency medical crews arrived at Seattle Center. The area surrounding the festival quickly transformed from a place of celebration into an active emergency zone. Police began clearing the grounds, urging anyone who could walk to leave immediately. Nearby, buildings were searched to make sure no suspects or injured victims had been left behind. Roads around Seattle Center were closed as emergency vehicles poured into the area. For families who had become separated during the panic, the next few minutes were agonizing. Parents searched for children. Friends called one another repeatedly, hoping someone would answer. Mobile phone networks became overwhelmed as hundreds of people tried to contact loved ones at the same time. Meanwhile, investigators faced another challenge. In the confusion that follows any major public shooting, information often arrives faster than it can be verified. Early reports differed on how many suspects had been detained and whether additional shooters were still at large. Officials worked carefully to separate eyewitness accounts from confirmed evidence, while reminding the public that the investigation was still unfolding. By the end of the evening, crime scene investigators had begun documenting the area, collecting shell casings, examining surveillance footage, and interviewing dozens of witnesses. Every photograph, every statement, and every piece of physical evidence would help reconstruct what had happened in those terrifying moments. But one question remained at the center of the investigation: who opened fire, and why did this confrontation erupt in the middle of one of Seattle's largest summer festivals? The answers investigators uncovered would reveal disturbing details about the people involved and the weapons they were carrying. As emergency crews finished treating the wounded, investigators took over the scene. The festival grounds remained closed as detectives searched for answers. Shell casings were carefully collected. Surveillance footage was reviewed, and witnesses were interviewed one by one. Every piece of evidence was needed to reconstruct the events that had unfolded in less than a minute. Police soon announced that they did not believe this was a random attack. Instead, investigators said, the evidence pointed to a confrontation involving multiple people who exchanged gunfire in the middle of the crowded festival. One of the first major developments came with the arrest of a 15-year-old suspect. Prosecutors alleged that the teenager fired several shots during the incident. Because the suspect is a juvenile, authorities have released only limited details about the case. Investigators also recovered weapons that raised new concerns. According to court documents, one firearm was described as a ghost gun, while another was a Glock pistol fitted with an illegal conversion device, commonly known as an auto switch, capable of firing at a much higher rate than a standard handgun. As forensic experts analyzed bullets and shell casings, detectives worked to determine who fired the fatal shots. Police also said the shooting appeared to be gang-related, though they emphasized that the investigation was still ongoing and additional suspects were being sought. With each passing day, investigators uncovered more evidence. But one question still lingered. How could a dispute involving a handful of people turn one of Seattle's most beloved summer festivals into a scene of tragedy? When the police tape finally came down, Seattle Center looked very different. The music was gone. The crowds had disappeared. Food booths that had been filled with laughter just a day earlier now stood empty as vendors returned to collect equipment left behind. During the panic, some found abandoned meals, overturned chairs, and personal belongings that people had dropped while running for safety. For many, the images were difficult to process. What had been a celebration of food and community had become a place forever linked to tragedy. In the days that followed, friends, relatives, and strangers gathered to honor those whose lives had been cut short. Candlelight vigils were held, flowers were placed near the scene, and heartfelt messages appeared across social media. People shared memories of Carlos Israel Sanchez Villalba and Ashley Whitehead, remembering them not for how they died, but for the lives they lived and the families who loved them. City leaders also expressed their condolences, while community members renewed calls for stronger action to address gun violence and improve safety at large public events. For many residents, the shooting was a painful reminder that even places meant for celebration are not immune to violence. Meanwhile, the investigation continued. Detectives urged anyone with photos, videos, or information to come forward as they worked to identify everyone involved in the shooting. The grief was real, but so was the determination to find answers. As this documentary is being recorded, the investigation remains ongoing. A 15-year-old suspect has been charged. Detectives continue to examine forensic evidence, and authorities are still working to determine the full sequence of events and identify everyone responsible. Like many active criminal investigations, some details may become clearer as additional evidence is presented in court. For the victims' families, however, no court ruling can erase what happened that evening. Their loved ones are gone, and the memories of that summer festival will forever be tied to. If there is one lesson from the Bite of Seattle tragedy, it is that ordinary moments should never be taken for granted. A meal shared with family, a walk through a festival, or a photo beneath a landmark can become memories that people cherish for reasons they never imagined. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing for more in-depth coverage of major crime stories and investigations from around the world.